So welcome everyone once again. Under the sub-theme of climate change and urban ecological crisis, this talk will specifically look at city environment and climate change. And at the end of the presentation, I would like to also hear from all of you your experiences with the different episodes of climate change and the perspectives or the changing perceptions of environment in a city that you have faced or worked with or are experiencing. I would love to know more on that. So if we just think for a moment, does climate change induce urban ecological crisis, or is it the other way around? Now, what is urban ecology? Urban ecology may be defined as the application of ecological concepts to the urban environment, viewing the city as an ecosystem where modifications or alterations affect the landscape and urban area as a unit. This discipline cuts across interlaced themes, incorporating social, economic, and environmental dimensions of sustainable development. Urban ecology focuses on the changes in natural and social systems that occur as a result of urban ecosystems expanding around the world, including the complex processes and interactions between living and non-living components in urban setup. Now, city and environment. So the presentation will have four sub-themes, which we will go through and try to understand how cities affect environment and how city and environment come together in bringing about the crisis that we face in terms of climate change, and how again city can also play a role in bridging the gaps that are experienced in the form of climate change. So the first sub-theme, city and environment, the main processes of change due to human and natural environment integration are visible in terms of changes in urban biodiversity, climate, human demography, and urban economy, among others. And as cities grow, we often we can experience, we visualize that there is loss of vegetation, biodiversity, loss of native species, habitat fragmentation, and increase in the number of introduced species. Green landscaping and urban forestry planning are more focused on beautification and aesthetics in the city, though these affect the size and shape of canopy cover, distribution and seasonal availability of greenery, and duration of flowering season, so on. A city is in a constant state of flux, with changes brought in by demography, endless phases of construction, maintenance, and infrastructural projects, at times drastically decreasing expanses of natural ecosystems, shrinkage of open spaces, disappearance of water bodies that lead to degenerative environment, and at other times set to a gradual loss of biodiversity, canopy cover, and the related ecosystem services. The cities worldwide are struggling with a number of environmental and social problems as the growing cities face air, water, and soil pollution, resource depletion, and aging infrastructure. As a result, there is renewed interest in developing and testing new solutions to these problems, with an increasing emphasis on approaches that apply ecological principles such as green infrastructure, habitat preservation and connectivity, and the need of analyzing ecological footprint. City dwellers and urban planners now face a new set of challenges as the study of urban environment transitions into the phase of understanding cities and human settlements from an ecological perspective, since the urban ecosystems contain a broad range of distinct microenvironments and biological assemblages, from remnant natural ecosystems to almost completely human-built and constructed environments. The term built environment can refer to many different ecosystem components, some of which are similar to natural ecosystems, along with human-induced and highly modified materials. There is a particular need to consider the linkages among the built and biotic components of cities for a better understanding of the factors that culminate into urban ecological crisis. In the built environment, some of the aspects that one can keep in mind are responses of natural ecosystems structure and functions as the environment and social landscape goes through changes caused by built environment. So if there is encroachment of a construction project into water bodies or open spaces, this land conversion leads to habitat loss, and then as a result of that, there is also loss of ecosystem services. So what are these interconnections, interrelations, and the effects that one have on the other is important in the understanding of an urban ecosystem. Economic changes and continuous rural to urban migration are important factors for the function and development of urban agglomerations. A town's role in the interregional network of cities is affected by its economic functions, services, and linkages or connectivity to nearby settlements. Cities have undergone rapid changes in morphology and economy, becoming increasingly integrated into global supply and demand systems. Alongside these developments, a key factor in advanced economies for urban agglomerations is the transition from industrial to service-based economies. The spatial characteristics of these changes also come about in unmaking of cities, which can be seen through the emergence of abandoned plots of land on former industrial premises or ghost towns, replacing the once thriving townships caused by combined policy decisions, planning, technological advancements, financial ooze, and environmental degradation. Another representation of changing urban environment can be experienced in the forms of various vertical heights due to growing demand for spaces for exceptional quality of amenities. In a world of fierce competition, governments see it as imperative to prioritize economic infrastructures, whether it be for export-oriented manufacturing or growing service sectors, above the social amenities that households require to improve their living conditions. What these trends point to is the challenges of policy, governance, and the legitimacy dilemmas that urban development decision makers face. Policy frameworks and tools promoted by development agencies at times do not help stakeholders in a way that would help advance sustainable transformative urban changes. They are often not empowered to deal decisively with economic inequality, further widening urban divides and disparities. Now, temperature increase and greenhouse gas emissions are already on the rise in cities. The responses to adaptations for and health impacts of environmental changes in cities are important for urban planning. Environmental impacts are highly variable among different locational nodes within a city as well as between cities. There is also increased burden of diseases, increased morbidity and mortality from more frequent and intense heat waves amidst transitioning weather patterns that are superimposed on the already existing urban heat island effects. With urban development, ecological degradation is inevitable, and amidst that, analysis of the responsibility of urban local bodies to deal with accelerated rates of urbanization at the same time as the global economy undergoes a series of structural changes that drive particular territorial necessities and constraints simultaneously becomes important. Now, the second section we move on to cities as contributors to climate change. Climate change refers to significant and long-term changes in the average weather patterns on Earth, and these changes are driven by natural processes as well as human activities that have accelerated the detrimental consequences over the past decades. Now, climate change is in many ways exacerbating existing inequalities as the urban poor and other marginalized groups and communities find themselves facing most extreme impacts with least resources available. The complex effects of climate change demand comprehensive approaches encompassing not only immediate environmental symptoms, but also the underlying social drivers of vulnerability. The overlapping challenges of environmental stress and rapid urbanization are uniquely daunting. It is precisely this intersection that makes urban climate action opportune. On an average, the share of green spaces in urban areas has globally decreased. And while projections show that without appropriate measures in place, cities will suffer considerable impacts as a result of extreme weather events associated with climate change, the decisions that are made both in terms of mitigating the causes of climate change through decarbonization and strengthening adaptation measures by making cities more resilient will help determine to a large extent the severity of the extreme events that the city or urban areas may suffer. Transformative approaches at national and local levels could serve as a vital tool in delivering broad agenda of inclusion and social justice. Now, the primary human activities contributing to climate change include burning fossil fuel, deforestation, and industrial processes, which affect the ambient air. Climate change is manifested through the increasing frequency and intensity of heat waves across the globe. Extreme temperatures have far reaching consequences, including health risks, water scarcity, and crop failures on the one hand, while anomalies in moisture and wind system circulations trigger sudden heavy spells of rain that wreak havoc, such as flood, and prolonged rainfall can lead to landslides, waterlogging, and so on. Urbanization has led to innovations aimed at reducing the effects of pollution through environmental conservation, water harvesting systems, energy efficient buildings, landscape planning, sustainable commuting, and green space accessibility, though it also comes with detrimental effects on the natural ecosystems. Expanding cities lose appreciation for ecosystem services that are offered by natural surroundings, thereby diminishing resilience in a way in terms of mitigating problems arising out of urbanization, such as air quality deterioration, restricted green spaces, groundwater scarcity, loss of water bodies, etc. Now, urban ecosystems are a hybrid of natural and anthropogenic components whose interactions are affected not only by the natural environment, but also culture, human lifestyle, policies, economics, and social organizations. Urban ecosystems have today become integral to environment as they have direct and indirect impacts on the immediate surroundings and larger environmental continuum. The impacts of cities are well beyond their physical boundaries. With rapid urbanization, cities have been the centers of major environmental problems. Meanwhile, urban areas are increasingly becoming the engines of innovation and socioeconomic development for mitigation and adaptations to local, regional, and global social environmental challenges. With more and more people living in cities, urban areas are increasingly key to regional and global sustainability, and urbanization has become a part of sustainability from local and global scale. Urban growth in the last 200 years has been unprecedented, though cities and towns cover a very small area of Earth's land surface characterized by high population density. And yet, this small aerial coverage is contributing a very high percentage of the greenhouse gas emissions that are one of the drivers of climate change and affect people and put settlements at risk. Now, city planning and environment are closely linked concepts that play a crucial role in shaping urban areas for sustainability, livability, and resilience. Effective city planning takes into account environmental factors and works towards the minimization of ecological footprint, while also aim at the improvement of the quality of life for its residents. Recognition of the value of urban green space has changed the course of urban planning and management in many cities. Nonetheless, an expanding city with ever-growing population density and network of civic services almost always comes with deteriorating consequences on the larger ecology of land and water bodies that help to sustain it in the first place. Therefore, a holistic understanding of the interrelationships, interdependencies, and interconnections, that is the cause and effect, of living and non-living components that influence, modify, or adjust the changes in land cover and land use, together with their resultant effects at local, regional, and amidst planetary circulations, is crucial. Cities are not only contributors of large-scale greenhouse gas emissions, but are equally vulnerable to its effects. Transportation, energy consumption, industrial and commercial processes, waste generation, management, and disposal from all production and consumption patterns, in addition to urban heat island effects in crowded cities, not only make way for extreme, sudden and slow onset climate events, but also often create obstructions to disaster mitigation that is to a large extent controlled and facilitated by city morphology and environmental planning. The urban heat island effect is unique to cities and will become even more pronounced as climate change related heat waves become more frequent. This effect is most pronounced in cities characterized by large expanses of urban paved and concrete structures, which absorb radiant heat, and conversely, a lack of reflective or green spaces for cooling down or for effective cooling through the end of the day. The heat island effect can raise average city center temperatures anywhere from 5 degrees centigrade above those in the surrounding countryside. And this effect is even stronger at night when temperature in urban environments can be up to 10 degrees higher compared to surrounding areas. The heat island effect also makes city power grids more vulnerable to extreme weather events as more power demands for air conditioning rise sharply during higher temperature durations, creating a vicious cycle of more climate change emissions. Concrete is among the world's most consumed materials, second only to water. And because of its durability, affordability, and availability, it is essential for a number of constructional projects from like construction of bridges, roads, buildings, and is used in a large scale. Therefore, it also produces large amount of heat trapping carbon greenhouse gases. And mostly from the manufacturing processes and construction units, there is emission of a lot of CO2. And the world still needs concrete to build infrastructure that can cope with climate change and population growth. So here this becomes, like a domino effect, which, keeps rolling on and on. And the question comes up that how do we lower concrete's environmental impacts when in the first place we need to heavily rely on it? The third section goes on to dealing with the impacts of climate change on cities. The World Cities Report 2024 projects that more than 2 billion people currently living in cities could be exposed to an additional temperature rise of at least 0.5 degrees Celsius by 2040. Since 1975, exposure to flooding in cities has grown 3.5 times more than exposure to flooding in rural areas. Now, incidences of flood and as a result, the resultant damages to infrastructure has been increasing. There are extreme weather events cases which we experience as more frequent and severe uh, episodes of cyclones and heavy rainfall that batter cities within a very short duration of time. Economic impacts come in the form of the costs incurred for repair work, adaptation, infrastructure, the associated health risks that climate change bring about in cities come in the form of spread of diseases which have been recording increasing incidences and cases. Heat wave is another problem or phenomena that is uh, affecting not only the health of working people who are out in the roads, but also people who live in congested spaces indoors. And air pollution and heating up of ambient air in cities from growing number of vehicles, production processes, constructional activities, use of cooling machine leads to respiratory and cardiovascular diseases. Waterborne diseases, again, because of the changing patterns of precipitation, increased flooding, and release of waste materials into sources of drinking water supply can contaminate water supplies and networks and lead to outbreaks of waterborne diseases. Warmer temperatures induce vector-borne diseases, and ultimately, the erratic nature of temperature patterns and as well as precipitation reception affects the growth of crops and in turn can disrupt food chain, food supply chains. Now, addressing health risks requires comprehensive urban planning, improved healthcare infrastructure, and policies aimed at mitigating climate change and enhancing resilience in urban areas. Air pollution alone is responsible for millions of deaths annually, mainly attributed to non-communicable disease, and is also aggravated by physical inactivity because there is lack of green spaces and open spaces outdoors, and to avoid the polluted air outside people stay indoors, and in indoors also there is exposure to an extent of indoor air pollution from the heat that is generated from several kinds of equipments used indoors, and this also has a much larger number of sufferers in the amongst the urban population. Air pollution is recognized as one of the biggest environmental threats to human health, which is linked to a significant burden of diseases and the resultant economic burden. Average particulate air pollution levels in many cities are frequently higher than the World Health Organization air quality guideline levels, putting urban population at risk of long-term health problems. Ground level ozone produced by the atmospheric interaction of a mix of air pollutants, including methanes and oxides of nitrogen, is another health risk, raising rates of asthma and chronic respiratory illnesses, as well as other sorts of breathing problems and reduced lung function. Ozone, especially ground level ozone, reduces crop productivity in peri-urban areas and also mix with polluted air and is one of the reasons why there is so much of smog problem in most of the cities these days. A number of factors contribute to the increase in air pollution in cities, including increased urban power demand, which drives up power plant emissions and soaring use of private vehicles as one of the offshoots of large-scale urbanization and economic development. Building heating and cooling systems, again, which are mostly energy inefficient, also play a role, as do industrial emissions when industries are located in close proximity to cities and homes. Solid waste disposal and dumping grounds, burning of agricultural waste in peri-urban areas are also sources of urban air pollution. Now, how can cities help protect environment? Urban green and blue spaces such as parks and sports fields, as well as urban forest belts, zones, wetlands, also function as natural ecosystems that represent a fundamental component of any urban ecosystem. And these play an important role in carbon sequestration. So understanding the importance of green coverage and vegetation, trees, as well as water bodies becomes very important because they are sources that absorb carbon from the atmosphere and help to an extent in reduction of the levels of carbon in the air. Having access to green and blue spaces can also help, reduce health inequalities and improve well-being. Climate resilient infrastructure refers to how well an infrastructural network withstands and how quickly it recovers from natural hazards made worse by climate change. As climate change causes disasters like floods, cyclones, heat waves to become more severe or are experienced in unusual places and at unexpected time, much of city infrastructure calls for redesigning, rebuilding, and rejuvenation for climate resilience. The main aspects of climate resilience come in the form of preparation, adaptation, and recovery. The preparation includes building structures to withstand significant stresses like high-speed winds for protection from storms, cyclones, and well-planned stormwater drainage for flood prevention, while sustaining minimal damages. Preparation also means communicating hazard risks to residents so they know how to shelter or evacuate when disasters strike, including communications through hazard maps, text alerts, or evacuation routes, which we now have been, experiencing a lot of it in the recent past few cyclones that had affected, especially the Bengal coast. Adaptation recognizes that hazard risks change, especially on a warming planet, with requirement of flexible responses. For instance, the zoning laws are very important. What are the restrictions that can be placed on building structures and where structures or building can be permitted or not allowed, and building codes, that is what kind of materials the high rises can depend on. There's continuous need of updation and changes that relate to climate projections. Older homes must also be retrofitted to ensure they meet the highest construction standards. Finally, communities must make plans and reserve resources for recovery. To be effective, recovery must both must include complete and rapid quick damage access, alternatives to existing relief and rehabilitation plans for timely aid, and repair and distribution of resources as well as funding. Now, what kind of role do smart cities play in the fight against climate change? The parameters that delineate smart cities from other cities vary from place to place. Now, smart cities may be defined as the initiatives or approaches that effectively leverage digitalization to boost citizens' well-being and deliver more efficient, sustainable and inclusive urban services and environments as part of collaborative multi-stakeholder processes. These can be considered as innovative city that uses information and communications technologies and other means to improve quality of life, efficiency of urban operation and services, and competitiveness, while ensuring that it also meets the needs of present and future generations with respect to economic, social, and environmental aspects. The elements of smart city include smarter urban transport networks, upgraded water supply, environment-friendly waste disposal facilities, and buildings with high energy efficiency, monitoring of air pollution, implementation of smart recycling systems, and installation of LED lamps in public light systems, which are aimed at consuming lesser energy. Such cities are again aimed at building clean and sustainable environment and enabled to fight against climate change while improving people's quality of life with the use of advanced technologies. Though the success of these cities again becomes questionable and at times come at a cost of competitive economy and development at the expense of people's rights. Now, the way cities contribute to greenhouse gas emissions can be understood by the adoption of effective climate change mitigation strategies, where how much a city contributes to greenhouse gas emissions can be calculated using baseline of emissions and greenhouse gas inventory, which are important steps that can help to aim for emission reduction goals and ensure through comparisons between cities and between countries as to what levels of greenhouse gas emissions are coming from particular cities. Climate change vulnerability assessments in urban areas help policymakers to understand and prepare for climate change vulnerability through a number of international and local approaches and tools available for undertaking a vulnerability assessment. Often, vulnerability is considered as a function of exposure, sensitivity, and adaptive capacity. To what extent a city can come back after it is affected by any kind of disaster or flood, generally that is understood as the degree of vulnerability. And such an assessment gives urban stakeholders information on the vulnerability of people and places to the effects of climate change, and accordingly plans can be prepared. Integrating climate change into local planning and mobilizing financial resources is very important, because climate change planning at regional level, including the effects of climate change that are experienced locally, becomes one significant aspect. Planning and investment decisions are often taken at the subnational levels or regional levels, and climate change impacts the services local institutions provide. So the mitigation and adaptation policies can be mainstreamed into local planning by identifying vulnerabilities and solutions in the different types of local plans and processes. Cities can also develop and adopt standalone plans that focus solely on climate change action for the local environment. Given that the world is urbanizing, cities will need to be central actors for addressing climate change. More financial resources are required for urban mitigation and adaptation, as is envisaged by a number of reports and research cases, in particular in countries where the adaptive capacity of cities is often low. Now, climate summits play a significant role, as these are platforms for raising concerns and sharing of climate action plans, assessing progresses that have been made or are on the way, and collectively pushing for stronger commitments to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, adapting to the climate impacts that are being experienced, essentially providing a platform for coordinated international action on a global concern. Though the success of climate actions, that come about through the different summits, again, sometimes are lost beyond these forums. Now, in conclusion, we may sum up saying that cities urgently need to progress on net zero targets while building resilience against extreme weather events and shocks associated with climate change simultaneously. Climate justice must be central to urban climate action, especially for informal settlements and slums, A just climate transition addressing structural vulnerabilities must be central to climate action in cities to ensure that no one and no place is left behind, which is significantly envisaged by the Sustainable Development Goals. Promoting low carbon and resilient housing and basic services offers major benefits for climate action. Consequently, investments in infrastructure should integrate climate considerations into their planning, implementation, as well as maintenance. Cities need to reverse the decline of green spaces for effective climate action. A shift in policies and urban planning frameworks is urgent to prioritize conservation of existing green spaces and generating new ones in cities. Urban and land use planning and design are critical instruments for climate action. Climate responsive urban and land use planning must be used to accelerate progress towards net zero commitments while strengthening adaptation. Effective climate action requires multi-level governance and collaboration across scales with the participation of both public and private concerns. Now, this is one thought that keeps coming to my mind, that cities, while expanding, they take up the space of natural environment and add to the incidences of climate change. So this is again going back to the question or the thought that we began with. Urban ecosystems are intentionally created. I mean, even if cities are not planned, they grow, they come out, they emerge out of some kind of activity or intervention. So they are not totally completely natural. They have natural environments as part of them, and yet urban ecosystems often function in surprising and unanticipated ways, with a multitude of complexities and interacting components, feedbacks, and non-linear dynamics as a unit called city. Nevertheless, there are still limitations to translating these results into usable information for practitioners, as the urban ecological literature increasingly demonstrates that interactions among the human, non-human, and abiotic components of cities are highly place, site, and species specific. Thereby, new challenges keep surfacing as cities move towards large-scale implementation of actions, policies, and designs. Urban areas are both greatly affected by the impacts of climate change and are also major contributors to the emission of greenhouse gases, as we've already gone through this. Urban adaptation and mitigation are aimed at providing significant opportunities, with cities having a key role to play in addressing climate change. Looking for the potential avenues of ecological reforms by putting together grassroots, community, environmental initiatives, development of green consumerism and green investment, environmental best practice, or the development of alternative code of practice on the part of individuals and organizations as part of a city become essential.